That's advantageous to me, as I am certain that you must follow through on your commitments once you get married. For 50 years, Cliff Richard remained married to the same woman. Instead, she wed his best friend, then another person, and ultimately, she passed away in his arms. He never married and had no children. He simply continued to perform, while concealing the largest split in British music history. The police weren't the first to harm him when they broke into his home in 2014. Something had already been secretly agreed to by the BBC. The harm was real, but the charges were untrue. He lost weight, had shingles, and had trouble sleeping. His own house felt unclean, he claimed. Now he was too afraid to leave his home, the man who used to fill Wembley Stadium. Harry Roger Webb was born in British India's Lucknow in 1940 at King George's Hospital. The world was already experiencing conflict and transformation at the time. In the midst of World War II, Indian independence demonstrations were becoming increasingly contentious. In 1946, riots broke out on Direct Action Day, and British citizens began to flee the colony. Among them were the Webbs. Although Harry's father was employed in the colonies, it was evident that the empire was collapsing by 1948. Thus, they departed, although not by automobile or aircraft. Rather, they traveled across the Indian Ocean in a crowded, slow ship. Their getaway was the SS Ranchi. For 3 exhausting weeks, it carried many British families, leaving them without a place to return to. They had to cope with rations and gloomy sky after working as servants in the sun. England was still recovering from the war and was cold. At last, the Webbs settled into a modest home in Chawton, Surrey. The pleasant nights and large rooms were gone. Even though he had previously lived in comfort, that difficult beginning strengthened him. After that trip, he thinks he has to prove himself and turn this weird new life into something more. Harry Webb was gone shortly after that. There was a man named Harry Grader X listening intently. He was adept at handling skills and identifying patterns. In his words, "You need a name that sounds like rock," Harry stated. Cliff was just a concept. Richard, a tribute to the insane American rock artist Little Richard, came next. Strong, British, solid, like a cliff face. All of Harry Webb was that. A birth took place. His name was not the only thing he changed. In Britain, he modified the music. The song, Move It, was released on August 29, 1958. It was loud, gritty, and defiant. It didn't sound like the tidy, courteous pop of the day. Cliff was just 18. When the song peaked at number 2 on the UK charts, it was shocking. For the first time, British teenagers got their own rock star. He created something new rather than attempting to emulate Americans. Other bands like the Beatles and the Stones were able to emerge because of that one song. But it was more than just the music. It was the insane one. When Cliff went on tour that year, Britain went berserk. Girls wailed, yelled, and fainted. He stole the show, which annoyed the boys. The security personnel could not keep up with the size of the groups. It was as insane as Elvis Presley. However, this took place in Manchester, London, and Leeds. This was the first time it had occurred. The press did the same, praising it and labeling it Cliff Hysteria. In 1959, the insane got even worse. Cliff thought the music was too flimsy and weak to even release. "Living dull," he said. "I hated it," to the producer. However, the band substituted a slow country hymn. It sold 770,000 copies and topped the charts for 6 weeks. He received a silver disc in November. By January, he had a gold. Travelin' Light, which followed, remained at the top for an additional 5 weeks. Between the two, Cliff sold over 1 million songs. In Britain, something had never been done before. Hollywood requested a meeting. Cliff starred in a serious film in 1959 called Serious Charge. It wasn't an enjoyable film. It was about serious moral concerns, false accusations, and being gay. When Cliff, who was only 19, joined, everyone was taken aback. A year later, he appeared in the mocking film Espresso Bongo, which ridiculed the music industry. Cliff became more than simply a teenage hero because of these parts. Being more than just a vocalist was his dream. Pop stars from Britain had never done that before. Then summer vacation arrived. The inaugural showing took place on January 10, 1963, in London. In Leicester Square, there were 3,000 supporters. Cliff was unable to exit his automobile and was stuck there. It didn't matter if he didn't make his own debut that evening. The music immediately shot to the top of the UK albums chart before the film was shown in theaters around the nation. It remained there for 14 consecutive weeks. Numerous songs from the film, including The Next Time, Bachelor Boy, and Summer Holiday, even reached the top of the charts, including the instrumental song Foot Tapper by The Shadows. After From Russia with Love, it was the second biggest hit in British theaters in 1963. In the same year, Cliff was also selected as the favorite movie star in the UK. But then came the Beatles. The majority believed Cliff would be expelled. Despite this, Cliff scored 6 successes in the top 10 in 1964, which coincided with Beatlemania. Only 5 could be obtained by the Beatles. His popular songs such as On the Beach Constantly and I Could Easily Fall in Love with You helped him stay in the spotlight. Even as the Beatles changed music and dominated America, Cliff remained steadfast at home. A serious fight broke out. The Beatles' A Hard Day's Night and his film Summer Holiday were viewed simultaneously across the nation. In Britain, people remembered which one came first, even though both shattered records. It was stated by Paul McCartney himself. He claimed that before the Beatles left for Hamburg, Cliff had everything prepared in Britain. According to John Lennon, after Cliff Richard and Move It, there was nothing worthwhile to listen to in England. Something really odd happened in 1965. New Musical Express conducted a global user survey. Voters were asked to identify the world's greatest male vocalist. Cliff passed Elvis. John Lennon lost to him. He triumphed over McCartney. That year, the Beatles released Rubber Soul and Help. Cliff prevailed, but Elvis could still be purchased elsewhere. Why? Because despite the changes in the world around him, Cliff continued to evolve. He had no desire to emulate the Beatles. He deviated from the norm. He had a good mix of genuine charm, faith-based films, and pop music. He never changed. It was significant to people everywhere. Both before and after the British arrived, he was their rock. Something significant in the music industry didn't go as expected in June 1966. Cliff Richard didn't sing when he took the stage at Earl's Court. Rather, he announced his conversion to Christianity to thousands of people while standing behind American preacher Billy Graham. It wasn't a single person's silent decision. A courageous person's public statement was broadcast across the nation. He startled fans who viewed him as Little Richard or a British Elvis. A few folks started crying. Others were stunned and just stood there. The man they admired for his radicalism had undergone an unexpected transformation. However, this moment did not simply occur. It was the end of a spiritual journey that had started 2 years before. It seemed even more serious because it was performed in the midst of the chaotic 1960s, in front of Billy Graham's enormous audience. Rock stars were prohibited from discussing God at that time. They were expected to be disobedient, go above and beyond, and disobey the regulations. A pop star, according to the society, should be many different things. Almost immediately, people became concerned. Some followers believed that he had permanently retired from music. There were others in the industry who believed he might leave and become a teacher. It was a fairly close thought. Cliff considered permanently leaving the stage. He might not be able to be a good Christian and be a noticeable person in public. Music journals were discussing who could take his place. Travel agents took a step back. People in the industry believed that being a star and spiritual at the same time was impossible. For a while, neither did Cliff. Then something was different. Cliff remained there. He remained. He created something entirely new in the process. He continued to write songs and hold fast to his beliefs. Instead, he managed to combine the two. He was the first major UK pop musician to publicly discuss his faith while still being in the charts. No one had ever done that before. Not in this manner. He demonstrated that it was possible to lead two lives simultaneously. If you were open about your beliefs, people would still attend concerts. Keeping your employment wasn't the only consideration in this decision. He was unique because of it. Cliff then claimed that his rock star persona was a fabrication. He was not a believer. Actually, he wasn't there. When he converted to Christianity, that changed. My confidence grew. My attitude changed. It wasn't important to be right all the time. The pressure to play a role disappeared. He felt free to be real. He claimed that his improved confidence helped him perform better on stage when the Beatles and Merseybeat performers dominated the charts. While everyone else tried to keep up, Cliff grew stronger because he felt like himself at last. Cliff's work, however, was at its worst by the mid-1970s. In 1975, for the first time, he had no songs in the charts. People started to think he was out of time. Then, in April 1976, Devil Woman was released. It was the loudest, riskiest, darkest song he had ever performed. It told a strange tale of a missing cat, a psychic, and a curse. The fact that it rocked is what matters most. In the US, it peaked at number 6, and in the UK, at number 9. It was the first of his songs to reach the US top 10. The sales exceeded 2 million copies. Cliff returned. The fact that he was hugged by the hard rock crowd was even odd. To support his new album, Elton John, Eric Clapton, and Jimmy Page were spotted sporting "I'm Nearly Famous" buttons. Once regarded as neat and outdated, these guitar stars demonstrated respect for a guy. Cliff's latest album, according to one reviewer, even surpasses Marvin Gaye's finest work. You didn't simply return. Everything changed. The child from the 1950s was suddenly considered a true rock star. But he accomplished more than that. Over 25 years into his career, Cliff released Always Guaranteed in 1987. It was a contemporary pop record with a timeless tone that eschewed the tacky synths of the era. He collaborated with Alan Tarney once more as a result of Thriller. 1 million copies of the record were sold as a result. In the UK, it peaked at number 5 for 24 weeks and sold over 1 million copies. 3 million copies. 4 of the album's tracks were included in the UK Top 40. They sold 250,000 copies, and some of them even went silver. Even in the late 1980s, Cliff demonstrated that he was still capable of defeating the greatest. Christmas 1988 came next. Mistletoe and Wine, a gentle holiday tune about hope, was released by Cliff. He used glitter to record it over the microphone in the middle of July. The song was at number 7 when it was released. It soared to the top the next week and remained there for 4 weeks. It outsold Phil Collins, Kylie Minogue, and U2 with 750,000 copies sold in 6 weeks, making it the biggest UK hit of the year. By 2024, it had achieved platinum status and continued to earn $100,000 a year from fees. Decades later, people still couldn't get enough of it. However, one of the most remarkable periods was May 1989. Cliff released his 100th song. No other British artist had ever accomplished it. To celebrate, he invited 2,000 pals to the London Palladium. He invited them to select their favorite song after playing them 6 unreleased tracks. He chose "The Best of Me," the song that came in second. It was certified silver and peaked at number 2 in the UK. It also performed well abroad, peaking at number 59 in Australia, number 25 in New Zealand, and number 2 in Ireland. It was insufficient to simply reach 100. It was about continuing to be useful despite the constant changes in the commercial world. Cliff Richard's June 1989 performance at Wembley Stadium was unlike any other. It became a full-fledged performance. They dubbed it the event, and it was. At Wembley, it was crowded. Many came for anything other than the music. I was transported back in time. Cliff honored the television program Oh Boy in the concert's opening segment, which transported listeners to the 1950s. The same program that brought him fame in 1958. Cliff wasn't acting alone. He booked acts including the Dallas Boys, the Vernon's Girls, and the Kalin Twins. In the past, these bands dominated British rock and roll. The crowd's admirers remarked that it was like entering a real jukebox. The second half then started. Cliff then demonstrated that he wasn't merely being sentimental. With the ease of someone who had topped the charts for decades, he performed some of his more recent successes. Cameras were rolling. Professionals filmed the show, which was later released as a TV special and live album. It was more than just a job. This historical event was meticulously orchestrated. Cliff took home the Brit Awards Most Outstanding Contribution to Music trophy in 1989. But it was more than just the prize. That was not all it meant. The 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and now the 1990s all saw him achieve #1 hits, making him the only singer in history to do so. He has released 100 tracks by that point. As the 100th, "The Best of Me" immediately soared to the top of the charts. At that time, Cliff had 14 #1s and 65 top 10 hits. No one else even came near it. On June 30th, 1990, a year later, Knebworth Park, a massive performance to benefit the Northrop Robbins Music Therapy Charity, took place. In addition to Cliff and the Shadows, other performers on stage were Paul McCartney, Elton John, Pink Floyd, Eric Clapton, Genesis, and Phil Collins. They were all legendary. The audience continued to sing despite the heavy rain during Tears for Fears performance. Cliff once again demonstrated his belonging by standing with the biggest names in rock. Then December of 1990 arrived. Savior's Day is a recently released song. And in October 1989, Chris Eaton penned it. He drove a Rolls-Royce to a Christmas party and told Cliff about it. When the tape was played in the car, Cliff was correct when he declared, "This is a #1." It was number 6 at the beginning of the chart on December 8th. It rose swiftly to the 3rd position and subsequently to the 2nd. On December 23rd, it overtook Ice Ice Baby as the #1 song. The film was shot at Durdle Door and Swanage on a sunny September day. It depicted people wearing winter clothing, perspiring, and mistaking it for Christmas. But the outcome was spectacular. There was no slowing of the pace. Cliff released his best hits CD, Private Collection 1979 to 1988, during the same period. They sold more than 1 million copies. 2 million copies. He sold more than 20 million copies of it, making it his most successful album. With successes like We Don't Talk Anymore, which sold nearly 5 million copies worldwide, his name was played on every radio station in Britain. This was more than a relic. He outsold up-and-coming pop stars. He was in charge of a rapidly evolving company. After that, things took a peculiar turn. In 1999, Cliff published the Millennium Prayer. It was unpopular with many radio stations. It was not added to BBC Radio 2's playlist. They were still playing Tina Turner and Cher, who were Cliff's age, but they claimed that not many people enjoyed it. Radio 1 had already dropped classic bands like the Beatles. Cliff was reportedly deemed too elderly by Virgin Radio's Chris Evans. DJs were prohibited from playing the tune. The fans were furious. Even the BBC was the site of a protest by Cliff's fan group. The business world seemed to have abandoned him. Then the miracle occurred. The Millennium Prayer became a hit despite the fact that he lacked a major label, airtime, or a machine. For 3 weeks, not just one. November 28, 1999, through December 19, 1999. In the UK, it was his 14th number one. In 1976, he achieved his first number one. Fans purchased many copies. Churches supported it. It was a protest as well as a hit. Cliff circumvented the system. It was effective outside of the UK as well. In both Australia and New Zealand, the song peaked at number 2. It made it inside the top 20 in multiple European countries. 3 nations awarded it platinum status. Only those who believed the song was good heard it on the radio and saw it being advertised. A significant amount of money was raised for the organization Children's Promise. Cliff had demonstrated that you could be successful, have faith in yourself, and yet be at the top of the charts. In addition to his musical career, Cliff had a private life with some pretty depressing tales. On 1971, Cliff Richard invited Olivia Newton-John, a young Australian vocalist, to participate on his television program It's Cliff Richard. 22. They clicked immediately and grew close. Cliff was correct when he declared, "I knew right away she was a friend for life." They were close for over 50 years. Nevertheless, it wasn't until his book was published in 2020 that everyone realized Cliff adored her. He stated, "Olivia was engaged to someone else when many of us were in love with her." Cliff never got married, saying, "I missed my chance." Olivia appeared to have made a lasting impression. Additionally, he claimed that everyone who knew her eventually fell in love with her. What made this tale even more intricate? Bruce Welch, a member of Cliff's band The Shadows, was her fiancé. When Olivia was in charge of the business in 1968, she met Bruce. It was a tense start to their friendship. Bruce remained wed. The news reported on their romance. For 5 years, they planned to be married, but they never did. Throughout it all, Olivia collaborated closely with Cliff, performing and touring alongside him. When she eventually left him in 1973, Bruce fell into a depression and even injured himself. Rumors circulated. Instead, did she fall in love with Cliff? It was really quiet, but no one ever stated it aloud. Even though Cliff and Olivia were struggling, they continued to collaborate. The songs they sung together for almost 40 years are still remembered by fans. Suddenly from Xanadu was one of their numerous songs in 1980. They also performed When I'm 64 and other singles live. Their final duet took place during Cliff's 75th birthday performance at the Royal Albert Hall in October 2015. Their vocals blended so effortlessly that Cliff frequently remarked, "Olivia had a kind of grace that no one else could match." One Last Time was suddenly sung. On his 2023 album Cliff with Strings, My Kind of Life, Cliff paid homage to Olivia using the live performance. Then came the difficult part. 3 weeks before to her death, Cliff gave Olivia a call. She was cheerful, kind, and upbeat as always. She said to me, "Good day, Cliff. How are you, darling?" It didn't sound like she was about to pass away. Cliff stated after the call, I never thought for a moment that I'd be writing this. Olivia had spent 30 years battling breast cancer. She put up a fierce fight, but she never expressed her pain. When Mom passed away on August 8, 2022, Cliff was devastated. "I hate that word," he remarked, referring to death. Instead, he argued, she had simply ceased living. It made the solitude she left behind easier for him to handle. On August 14, 2014, Cliff Richard was enjoying himself at home in Portugal when he switched on the television. After seeing what he witnessed, he was unable to breathe. Helicopters circled his Berkshire home, while police searched his belongings while he watched live on television. It wasn't a break-in, but their initial, straightforward, but frightful thought was, "They look like burglars." The entire police operation was broadcast on television worldwide because of a covert agreement between the BBC and South Yorkshire Police. The BBC was aware of it beforehand. They desired drama and even referred to it as the money shot. They succeeded. Cliff Richard was completely destroyed. He was 77 years old at the time, a national treasure with a perfect record and decades of experience in the music industry. In the kitchen, he collapsed on his knees and sobbing. Images were viewed from Australia to the United Kingdom. In court, Cliff sobbed as he read aloud the list of nations that have released footage of his private life collapsing. He later said that the anxiety caused him to fear that he would suffer a heart attack or stroke. It all started with a single charge. At a Billy Graham rally at Bramall Lane Stadium in 1985, a man in his 40s claimed that Cliff had struck him. That gathering was packed with people. The crowd grew to 200,000 over 5 nights. Cliff supported the Christian cause he had been fighting for since 1966 on stage with Graham. However, the charge disintegrated rapidly. The man described the alleged assault occurring in a room filled with athletic equipment. The sporting equipment had to be stored somewhere else in 1985 since, for whatever reason, that room didn't exist. Nevertheless, it took the police 22 months to discover this. The police officers who were with Cliff the entire time and were supposed to keep an eye on him that night were not even asked what they had to say. At the end of the investigation, no one was charged. It cost $800,000, and it took nearly 2 years. Nothing. Not one. However, the damage was already done. The BBC entered their coverage for Scoop of the Year. That's right, the BBC entered the raid footage into an award competition while Cliff was still under investigation, as if the live raid and constant news coverage weren't enough. That decision alone resulted in an additional $20,000 in aggravated damages for the BBC. It was deemed arrogant and boastful by the court. The death toll continued to rise behind the scenes. Later, Cliff claimed to have fallen into a depression. Some days, he had a hard time falling asleep. At times, he was unable to even lift his arms. A case of shingles struck him. He lost weight. He was too exhausted and fell. His remarks gave him the impression that his house was unclean. His own house no longer felt secure to him. Even basic tasks like releasing an album or promoting his book were challenging for him. Everything ceased when the world regarded him as a story rather than a person. After that, it was one of the most peculiar periods of time ever. Shortly after the raid was broadcast, Cliff was the target of a fraud attempt. He demanded money and threatened to lie if he didn't get it. The police took that man's initial allegation of sex abuse seriously despite the fact that he was imprisoned. Cliff was viewed as a legitimate victim even if someone attempted to use the raid to coerce him into paying money. South Yorkshire Police ultimately awarded Cliff $400,000 in damages after acknowledging that it was unlawful for them to tell the BBC about their actions. Apologies and millions of dollars in legal settlements don't make up for the hurt caused by what transpired, even if they were publicly expressed. They succeeded. In addition to having to pay attorneys over $2 million, the BBC had previously awarded Cliff $2 million in damages. However, Cliff wasn't pleased with the way the prosecutors drafted their decision. Cliff didn't believe the CPS when they indicated there wasn't enough evidence to file charges. For the record, he stated, "There was no evidence, not a shred." The thing that frightened him the most was that cloud of doubt, the possibility that something might still be there. He remarked, "I feel I've been smeared, not by the police, but by the BBC." Despite being cleared and having done nothing wrong, he broke down in court once more, as he discussed his fear of being permanently altered. He told the MPs that being publicly named had altered the way he looked people in the eye. Whatever happened, the harm was done. People would constantly want to know more. That was all he had cause to think. There was his name all over the front pages. His face was displayed by the police as they removed meaningless evidence. One raid, one story, and a media circus had encapsulated his entire life. In July 2018, he prevailed in his lawsuit against the BBC. According to the judgment, the BBC had gravely and sensationalistically violated Cliff's right to privacy. Following that ruling, police cases could no longer be covered by the British media in the same manner. But simply winning was never enough for Cliff. Getting through was the goal. About letting everyone know that what happened to him was cruel in addition to being wrong. Those 2 years were never returned to him. He could never get rid of the steps, the news headlines, and the idea that his name would always be associated with it.